There are countless films based on World War II, whether seen from the point of view of the USA, Germany, Russia, France, Italy, or other major players in the conflict. These mostly depict either huge battles, sieges, invasions, resistance operations, concentration camps, or the general horror that befell the common people in their ordinary lives. Along comes a Czech film in a German occupation backdrop, tinged with pervading comedic touches that highlight and reveal darker dramatic underpinnings, in which the focus is placed not on warfare strategy, soldier comradeship, savage ideology, or human cruelty, but on the life of a naive young train station guard named Milos and his frustrated romantic expectations and misadventures, and partially as well on the womanizing train dispatcher Hubichka and his jealous station master. In this sense, spectators that were pleased by a movie like Roberto Benigni's La Vita è Bella, for example, will also find amusement and gravity in balanced proportion in closely watched trains. Though much like the former, a particular penchant for humor is markedly present. In closely watched trains, there's perhaps a subdued Chaplin-esque spirit hovering that, although rarely getting into slapstick territory, sets the stage for drawing inspiration for humor by stepping into social and political critique, as well as more fundamental issues related to the common man, in this particular case, a common boy, themes that are probed with sensibility and lightness together too, for example in Fellini's pre-La Dolce Vita films from the 50s. It's quite entertaining to witness Masha's lecherous uncle having a good old grope here and there when staging his young and merry female subjects, or when one sees the different kind of attention the court gives to the complaint of a mother whose daughter had been playing with Hubichka after having a probably much graver court session interrupted, or even when in a more familiar gag, Milos is caught spying on Hubichka while he's about to bed another lady. On another hand, some of the more thoughtful themes in closely watched trains would be adulthood, masculinity, belonging, self determination, deception, courage, introspection, curiosity, or apprehension of the world. In fact, the movie might as well be described comfortably as a somewhat bleak coming of age film in the vein of Au revoir les enfants, The Bridge, Come and See, and 400 Blows, the first three also with a World War II backdrop, but all movies which find youngsters confronting the world and themselves, therefore being forced to step up and withstand their tests in a grimly violent pressure cooker, and occasionally obtaining a much weightier result than one has bargained for. Notwithstanding its light-hearted and playful atmosphere used to counterbalance more serious explorations, one surprising aspect is the prevalence of sexual innuendo and directness of the dialogues, the nudity and inquiry of sexual themes, not just through speech and character, but also by discrete symbolism too. While the main character Milos is mostly driven by his infatuation towards Masha and his desire to consummate his passion, fueled by Masha's clear advances and invitations, which ultimately lead to the character's crippling anxiety and underperformance that will drive the narrative forward, the film also gives substantial prominence to Hubichka's apparent insatiable sexual drive and predatory instincts, which serve the purpose of building pressure in Milos's mind, given that both stand in polar opposites when it comes to experience and confidence. All throughout, there are mentions by different people of fornication behind the altarpiece of a church, breast and buttock groping, penis jokes, rabbit intercourse, backside stamping, among other carnal remarks and particularly suggestive situations. In fact, it wouldn't be surprising to find viewers with a background in psychoanalysis and psychology discovering a variety of ideas behind many of the episodes and character explorations. This is a film that will probably offer much for discussion in regards to human behavior, tendencies, and personality. In any case, this is clearly a film that should be taken as a direct product of the sexual revolution, but given its explicit discourse and exploration, one cannot help but to imagine how it must have felt incredibly risque and perhaps even outrageous to some back then, a sentiment that was probably shared by other prude or more conservative viewers when watching the also sexually charged Bergman's Persona or Antonioni's Blow Up, curiously both from 1966, the same year closely watched trains came out. Indeed, the importance of films that confronted or simply ignored production codes and broke moral boundaries set until then cannot be overestimated when it comes to assess the impact of the sexual revolution initiated in the 60s, and it's certainly fair to say that not only without examples such as these, there would hardly be films like The Last Tango in Paris, 9 Weeks and a Half, Eyes Wide Shut, or La Vie d'Adèle, to mention a few, but our very perception of sexual relations through mass media and culture would certainly be very different today. As already mentioned, the friction between confidence and shyness, familiarity and novelty, experience and ignorance, developed around the themes of intercourse and masculinity, represent a main dynamic that drives the narrative forward both in terms of storytelling and in character development, but one will also observe how these are subtly handled by indirect and understated elements within the film. A few of these suggestive details that come to mind are, for example, the tearing of the divan when both Ubichka and Milos lay there with their companies, which could be interpreted as a symbolism for the faded virginity, or the dangling old photographic camera curiously resembling a male organ after the sudden bombing of a studio, even more obviously relating the scene to Milos' accident with Masha by the banner at the back translated as "ready in 5 minutes" or "finished in 5 minutes", a scene which could only be made harder for Milos by the immense laughter of Masha's uncle. By having also minor details such as the paintings from the train driver, many of which refer to other famously arousing artworks with female subjects, such as those by Italian Renaissance artists, the narrative focus is kept on the incessant attraction and beauty that is highlighted by Milos's desire, as well as Hubichka's. Certainly, the fact that Hubichka itself means kiss in Czech, and the recurrent interrupted kisses between Milos and Masha suggest both the prevalent nature of love, especially during one's youth, and the temptation, often disturbed or cut off by external motives. Nevertheless, not all symbolism is assigned to reproductive significance, as one may notice as well how similar the rescue of Milos is to the religious iconography of the Deposition from the Cross or Entombment of Christ in Christian art, which hints at the sacrificial nature of Milos in a world that appears puzzling, impenetrable, and ruthless from his perspective, a world in which one such person is destined to wither and disappear unnoticed by all, or obliterated by unfathomable, inexorable circumstances, unless by sheer luck one is salvaged or unexpectedly let go by the hand of compassion or chance. A particularly significant example of this is the episode in which Milos is taken from the station at gunpoint, in a scene reminiscent of the already mentioned "Come and See", only to be later let out from the train as his suicide attempt becomes acknowledged by his captors. By its own literary and storytelling quality, Closely Watched Trains is a film worth watching, but perhaps unsurprisingly given the era of production, the film exhibits too a very strong visual identity that is not only aesthetically pleasant but also unique in its own way. Viewers fond of, for example, Wes Anderson's visual style of flat space, almost 2D frontal shots will find much to gloat upon on this beautifully and rigorously composed film. The sense of sometimes watching a graphic novel unfolding in the screen is rather compelling and results in a cinematic experience that should satisfy viewers with a penchant for unusually pretty canvases. A few of these types of shots follow immediately. Regardless of these peculiar shots, the film also showcases, during more typical photographic incursions, plentiful use of natural lighting, mostly on the outdoor scenes at the station, while being also unafraid of presenting dimly lit scenes of shadowy predominance, usually during less than decent episodes of a more lustful connotation. Throughout the remainder of the time, the lighting is kept to a sober, naturalistic look with no particularly dramatic intent, and indeed, the 60s may be considered a fundamental era of filmmaking where technical development and a more rebellious approach to the craft allowed for directors not only to present bolder stories and themes more in line with the already mentioned bustling and spontaneous period, but also to indulge in technical experimentation and adaptation that allowed film to break out from some of the plastic artificiality and moldy rules of older standards, which led to the exploration of many new possibilities in regards to conveying a story in a world that is meant to be experienced with the same nuances and layers captured by the senses of the viewer in everyday reality, but also with multiple tonal variations and keen poetical freedom. Is it any surprise then that this is the decade that has offered films such as Breathless, Marketa Lazarova, L'Eclisse, La Jetée, Fellini's Otto y Mezzo, The Color of Pomegranates, last year in Marienbad, or 2001 A Space Odyssey? Without further ado, this is a classic film that is bound to interest viewers curious about European cinema, should be taken as one of Czech Republic's finest cinematic creations. Any passionate fan of filmmaking that enjoys witnessing the comic and primitive side of human nature matched with the thoughtful inspection of a maddening world as seen by the probing eyes of a youth is sure to enjoy it. If convinced, make sure to check the British Film Institute Blu-ray with an outstanding 4K restoration by the Czech National Archive. I'll leave the link below on the description. And as always, thank you for tuning in and see you next time.